Well, hello again everybody. Well, I must apologise, it's been some time since I last made a video. My hair has got longer and gone even more grey, which isn't just down to paint. Yeah, not made a video in some time, probably been quite a few months, and just to let everybody know, some people have been asking, nothing wrong, just been you know, one of those busy summers. The weather's been really nice here in the UK for the last few months, and you know, make hay while the sun shines, because we don't get nice weather in the UK very often. Now, I'm sorry to say this video might actually jump around a little bit, because I haven't shot any of it in any particular sequence, and a lot of the footage is probably a little bit shaky because I've been holding the camera. God, I do look old, don't I? What happened? I used to be young. Yeah, what do you think? Is the hat an improvement? Yeah, perhaps. I think so. Maybe. Now, at one time, my garage used to be quite tidy and well organised, but I'm afraid, as you can see, yeah, that's no longer the case, is it? Well, I'm ashamed to say it really is in a bit of a cluttered state. There's absolutely stuff crammed everywhere. My workbench is, you know, now resigned to the middle of the workshop rather than being on the back wall, and there's a reason for that, because there is something now filling the space in my garage where my sports car used to sit, and this something that is sitting there is an awful lot bigger. And of course I could just tell you what that something is, but yeah, I'm not going to tell you right away. Let's see if anybody can guess. If you can guess before the end of the video, leave it in your comments. Let's see who's right. But no cheating. So in the words of Rolf Harris, can you guess what it is yet? No clues. Well, I suspect some of you probably know what it is already. Definitely no clues. Unfortunately, I can't really get a good picture of it in the garage because the vehicle is too big and my garage is too small. But what we've got here, we've got a 1953 Chevy 3600 3/4 ton truck.
Well, you know, spent about a day under here, and I'm not having a lot of fun.
Well, I've spent the whole day under here with the needle gun. And I've been sanding, I've been grinding, and yeah, starting to get a bit bored now, it's fair to say. Well, hopefully everybody can see that, and that's a look at the battery box. And the battery box on this old Chevy, you got to access it from the passenger's footwell. So I don't know if you can see there's a little metal cover there, a little biscuit tin lid, and that fits over this hole in the chassis, and that's where the battery will sit. So basically what I did was I descaled it all using the needle gun, and then when I descaled it, got all the rust off it, I spent about an hour rubbing it down with fine emery paper, sorry, coarse emery paper, then fine emery paper, and then I painted over some of this wonderful rust killing paint. So hopefully that's going to do the job. But yeah, rust, you never stop it for long, do you, unfortunately. And here's just a quick look inside the cab of the Chevy. So you can see it's got a nice wooden steering wheel and nice chrome gauges and some chrome on the dashboard. It's got one of these modern radios installed that you can plug a USB stick into it, so you can listen to all your old rockabilly tunes as you're driving along, and you know, some hot rods and some music from the 40s and 50s. And on the floor there's a fine collection of little pedals, which I count, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So from the far left we've got a parking brake which you operate with your foot. Then next to that you've got a little stud on the floor which is the dip beam for the headlights. Then next to that we've got a brake pedal, then a normal clutch pedal. Then we've got the accelerator, and then the far one looks like a little mushroom over there. That's actually the starter. And the switch is actually on the back of the starter motor, and there's a little rod that pokes through the bulkhead and presses against the back of the starter motor, and that's what makes it start. And it's a manual transmission, so apparently Simon Spears knows all about these because he left it in a comment. So we've got 4 on the floor as opposed to being an automatic. So I'm just lying underneath it now, and I'm kind of doing a rolling restore on it. I think one of the problems with doing old vehicles up, if you're not careful, you pull them all in pieces and then they sit around in pieces in your garage for about 10 years before you finally sell lots of boxes of pieces to somebody else who will maybe have the skill to put it all back together. So I have actually resisted the urge to pull it into 1,000 pieces, and yeah, I'm just doing little bits at a time. So one of the bad problems with this is that the paint is pretty poor. In fact, there's no kind of rust protection at all underneath it. So where it is rusty, and there's no holes or anything like that, but where it is rusty, I've been rubbing it down, and you know, I'm just patching it up as I go along. So I've kind of done underneath the wheel arches, and I'm working my way along the chassis now. And yep, there's the battery box that you were looking at from the inside before. So yeah, that's where we've got to today. Well, I'm still lying underneath the truck, and you can see the prop shaft there going to the back axle, and yeah, it's a pretty long propeller shaft on this vehicle. You can see there's a shaft there which goes about half the length of the bed, and then there's a solid shaft which I think they call a torque tube, so that doesn't rotate. There's actually a shaft inside that rotates, and that goes to this centre bearing which is halfway along the body. Now this is actually quite a big long vehicle. It's approximately 18 feet long, which is big. It fits in my garage with about an inch between the wall and the garage doors. And I've got a big garage, and yeah, it's a bit of a beast. So we'll just follow the propeller line back. So if we follow that prop shaft along, we come to the gearbox, and the gearbox is actually surprisingly small. It's only got 4 speeds, which I guess isn't that surprising, and it is a manual transmission. You can see the square filler plug on the side, and you can see that the back of the gearbox there, that feeds straight into this torque tube, which has got a solid shaft. So again, we've moved forward a little bit there, and you can just see the engine sump, and it's not a particularly big engine in terms of capacity, but it is a straight 6, which makes it quite a long engine, and you can see the sump is actually covered in oil, and the vehicle has a pretty bad oil leak, which is coming from this rear oil seal, and I haven't decided what to do with that because it's a bit of a pain to replace. It uses like a cord gasket. It's like a piece of rope, and I believe that it is possible to replace this cord with the engine still installed in the vehicle, but you've got to kind of maybe drop the transmission back a bit and undo, I think it's some of the main bearing caps, and it is possible to do it, but it sounds considerably more hard work than just putting more oil in it every now and again. So I think for the amount of time I actually will use this vehicle on the road, I think it's probably easier just to put more oil in it. Although, you know, if the opportunity arises to have to take the engine out for some reason, I think that's the time that we'll address that rear oil seal. I suspect the front oil seal is leaking a bit as well, but, you know, oil is cheaper than oil seals. So one of the other things that I've been doing recently, I went to the pound shop and bought quite a lot of these cheap brushes, because I found that if you are using paints like Hammerite, it's very difficult to clean the paint off, and it kind of ruins brushes quite quickly. So I bought some of these very cheap kind of pound pack sets of brushes with the idea of you use them once and then throw them away. But the bristles on these are absolutely so stiff. They kind of act like mini scrapers. So you put the paint off, and then the next brush stroke you actually scrape all the paint off again. So yeah, a bit of a false economy. Probably not funny. This is the pound shop brush. Ow! Spiky! Hurts. Ah, lovely. Ow! 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 Seems quite nice. And what I think I might do is try and use a paint kettle, because I don't like sticking a brush back into a big tin of paint, because I'm painting the chassis on the car, which is a bit dirty and grubby perhaps, and every time you pull the brush away from the chassis and put it back into the tin, you bring all the grit and the dirt, and the last bit of paint you got has got more dirt and grit in it than it has paint. But the problem with that idea of trying to decant it into a paint kettle is you end up either pouring too much out, or it just goes everywhere. And let's see if I can decant this. I don't think I want too much either. Oh, right, got most of it down the side of the tin, but yeah, some of it went in. So here I am underneath the car trying to paint the chassis, and I'm holding the camera in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. And it has to be said, even at the best of times, I am absolutely rubbish at painting. This probably isn't a good idea because I'm probably going to get paint all over the camera lens. So we're not going to do much painting. But I'm rubbish at painting, so if any of you have got any painting tips, any budding artists out there, or anything like that, if you can give me some tips about, you know, brushwork and how to paint things, I would love to know, because I'm just rubbish at it. But this brush seems to be a lot better than the other one I was using. The bristles are a lot softer, and it doesn't seem to be, you know, dragging the paint out the way in quite the same way. Okay, well I'm just going to carry on at that, and yeah, I'll bring you back when I'm done. I'm pretty sure it's going to take another coat because I can see through it to the primer underneath the grey primer. But I will carry on, and I will see you shortly. You can see the back of the battery box cover here, and this side has actually had a couple of coats of black paint on it, and ooh, I've just spotted some horrible runs. Ooh, better just sort them out. I much prefer this naphtha base paint to the Hammerite products because they dry too quickly, the Hammerite, so you don't really get any brush time. And I suppose you can thin them down, but I've just never got on very well with them. So I think that actually looks pretty tidy, doesn't it? So I've just crawled along and I'm now under the front part, and there's quite a few things I don't really understand about this vehicle. There's something about its history which is let's just say dodgy, because although it looks very good on the outside, the paint finish is really pretty appalling. So if you actually look at this, it's got rust coming through, and if you look at it, there doesn't appear to be any paint on it. The only paint on it is kind of overspray. So I'm not sure what's gone on here. I mean, it hasn't gone totally rusty, but there's obviously you know, a bit of a story going on. Now the only thing that I can think is I wonder if the vehicle in the past, or a lot of these panels have been, I don't know, blasted with something, because if you feel the paint or you feel the surface of the metal here, it's rough, it's got that, well, I'm not going to say shot blast, but it feels as though it's been blasted, the finish, and it's a bit hard to tell whether that's grey primer on it or I'm actually looking at bare metal. But it's also got little holes on it all over where it's actually, I think, blown through. But you can't see much rust. So there's something gone on here. Maybe it's something as simple as the vehicle was primed and then there's a long period where the primer was sat on the vehicle but it wasn't actually painted. And what happens is that a lot of the primers are, I don't know the word, be hygroscopic, but they absorb water, and it gets through to the metal underneath and makes it rust. And there's a lot of patches like that. I mean, when I bought the vehicle, it had just had a brand new paint job, and I think this is one of them things where, you know, we've probably all done it. We've all bought cars that look lovely, and the reality is you give it a couple of months and all the rust starts to come through. And I think this could be one of those vehicles. I should have actually inspected it a little bit better, but oh well, c'est la vie. No point in crying now. And there's a few little things, like I keep finding loose bolts everywhere. I think this is just holding the bottom of the radiator, and that's totally loose. That one's tight, but that one's loose. And I've been finding loose bolts everywhere, and as I actually find these loose bolts, I'm tightening them up. And the other thing I'm doing is half the bolts on it are imperial and half are metric. Now, of course, this would have been imperial, UNF and UNC pretty much everywhere. But yeah, there's half the bolts where they've been replaced, they've had metric bolts put in, which just means that you have such an odd combination of spanners that you have to carry around everywhere. So yeah, as I get to these various bolts, wherever I can, I'm replacing them. And we can see the underside of the radiator there. That's pretty rusty, isn't it? But I've actually got a new radiator on order from America, and annoyingly, pretty much the shipping from America for the radiator is almost as much as I'm paying for the radiator. So that's a bit annoying, isn't it? The top of the windscreen, there's a suspicious-looking join. It's amazing all the things that you find after you buy a vehicle and you don't seem to spot before. But I've got to admit, as soon as I saw the vehicle, yeah, I just fell in love with it, and I had to have it. And almost, even though I did see the odd little fault here and there, yeah, it was too late by then. I'd fallen for it. So it looks like there's a few things that aren't quite right. But having said that, there's a lot that is right with it. And you know, for a vehicle that's now over 60 years old, I would say that it's in, you know, generally pretty good condition. It could always be better, and I don't think it's going to win any prizes at a show. But yeah, I'm pretty smitten with the old girl. I'm in love. So we're at the back of the vehicle now, and here's a not very interesting picture of a wheel. Well, I actually installed some brake shoes on this about 2 weeks ago. I put new brake shoes on it, and they were lovely and clean, and I felt very smug and happy with myself. And then I put it down, and then I came in the garage the day after, and there's a huge puddle of oil all over the floor, and the oil seals in the axle had decided to fail, and it's pissed oil all over the new brake shoes and all over the drums, and created a slick of oil on the garage floor. So yeah, got that to do. But such is the fun of old and vintage vehicles. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but that's under the wing, and that's all been rubbed down and stone chipped. Can you see the rear? Hopefully you can see you've got the rear spring hanger there. Quite interesting that the spring hangers, rather than being metallastic, you know, on Land Rovers they have these rubber bushes and things like that. Well, there's no rubber in them. They're actually solid. I think they're a metal pin that goes through like a brass shell, and you can see that they've got grease nipples on them, so you have to pump grease into them. But it does mean that the ride on this is pretty hard, and the springs on it are very beefy. This vehicle is designed for 3/4 of a ton, so unloaded the suspension tends to be, or to me it feels very hard. So here's the back of the vehicle, and as one of my friends warned me, if you actually own a pickup truck, the back of the truck very quickly turns into a skip. But somewhere under there is a really nice wooden bed, which you know, the previous owner had installed. And it's interesting that this bed doesn't actually sit on like a metal sheet. It is actually designed to be a wooden bed, and as far as I understand, that's what they were like from the factory. So if you pull that wood up, you can actually see through to the road surface, you can see through to the floor. There isn't any metal under it, and they're not designed to have metal under them, so that's a bit interesting. Got to be a little bit careful with these bonnets. It's got these springs that hold the bonnet up, and they were looking a bit rusty, and I greased them, and now the bonnet won't stay up, so that was a bit of a fail. Or it does stay up most of the time, and then just now and again it lands on your head and hurts. So here's a quick look at the engine, which they call a stove bolt engine. It's a straight six, so not particularly exciting, not very powerful considering how big it is, but such is typical of American vehicles, isn't it? It's amazing how they manage to design such underpowered engines considering how big they are, but I guess it's a talent. Yeah, so you can see that unfortunately the wiring is a little bit of a rat's nest, and we need to do something to improve it, which might just be that I have to tuck it inside some, you know, spiral wrap or some split conduit. I think it'll probably be split conduit for now, and I'll drill and put some P-clips onto the bulkhead. Also got a little box there. Can you see what that little rectangular box? I don't know if anybody knows what that is. I'm wondering if it's some kind of antenna for the radio. Got no idea what it is. I haven't traced it yet, so if you recognise that and you can tell me what it is, please leave it in your comments. Yeah, so we've got this rat's nest of wiring here, and you can see that there's a cable which is snaking along the front wing, and that feeds a couple of horns, and then the cable disappears into the front wing and feeds the headlights and the indicators. And again, some little jobs that I have been doing is wherever they seem to be wiring stuff through the body, there was no grommets on anything, so I have been going round fitting grommets to all the cabling. So I'm trying to improve it and make it a little bit safer. So you can see the mess of wiring here, which is going to the right hand side, which I haven't rewired yet, and you can see the conduit, flexible conduit, feeding up there and going back to where it turns into a rat's nest again. So I'm sorting the wiring out slowly. It's probably going to take a little bit of time. As I say, I don't want to particularly take the vehicle off the road, even though I haven't been driving it much recently. I think I've only been out in it twice since I got hold of it. But I do know if you take it out in bits, pull it hundreds of bits, it'll just sit in the garage for years and I'll never get to enjoy it. So it's definitely, I'm trying to do it as a rolling restoration. I don't know if the camera will make it out, but I talked about the starter motor before, and I said the button under the cab. Well, that thing with a thick red wire going to it, you can see the starter motor, it's got a thick red wire going to it. Well, that's actually the switch, and the little rod from that switch sticks through the floor of the cab, and that's what you put your foot on to start it. Now, another little problem I found with it is that's the water pump there, and I found that whenever I was accelerating, I use that word loosely, the belt was squealing, so I thought somebody had put the wrong belt on it, so I ordered another belt and from America, and yep, the belt came just the same. So what I've determined is it's got the wrong water pump fitted on it. There's two styles of water pump. One of them has a 5/8 gap in the V belt, and the other one has a 3/8. Well, this is a 5/8, and I think that's why the actual belt is not sitting in the V. It's actually running at the very bottom of the pulley, so it's not gripping. And this vehicle also has a tendency just to overheat a little. So again, I've ordered another radiator from America. It's actually becoming quite distressing how much I'm having to pay for in spare parts for this. Actually, the spare parts from America, the parts themselves are really cheap. They're probably cheaper than a lot of modern cars. The problem is the shipping. I've placed some orders recently, and I've paid £300 in parts, and I've paid £300 in shipping. So the shipping from the States, it's just extortionate. I tried getting some stuff delivered by mail rather than UPS, and basically it was fine until it got to England, and basically the English post office just lose it. Or they don't know how to calculate the customs charge, and there's nobody you can speak to, and they don't know where your address is, and just the usual thing that it's not so pile that the Royal Mail's business is a pile of shit, because they're clueless. So I ended up buying this vehicle from the south of England. So me and one of my friends, Andy, we got the Land Rover Discovery out. We hired a big trailer and we drove down to I think it was somewhere in Sussex. And the idea was we were going to drive it back on the trailer. So we got it back on the trailer, and we got one junction down the motorway, 1 mile out of 200, and the trailer just starts fishtailing all over the road because this vehicle is really, really heavy. And my friend Andy says, we hit a bump in the road and it was fishtailing, and he goes, "Oh, Chris, I think some poo came out then." So the idea was we were struggling with it on the trailer. I think it was actually just too heavy for the Land Rover. So we ended up pulling it off the trailer, and the idea was I was going to drive a couple of junctions down and see how I got on. So that's what we did. So on my first journey, having not driven a manual car in probably 10 or 15 years, and certainly not driven a manual car that's anything like this, I had to drive all the way back. My first drive was 200 miles long. Finally got back in the pitch black, 2 o'clock in the morning, absolutely exhausted, and I think I wasn't quite so in love then. In fact, I was probably absolutely terrified, and I didn't know what I bought. And I've been out in it a few times since, and yeah, it's not quite like driving a brand new Land Rover Discovery with an automatic gearbox. The brakes are somewhat non-existent. The top speed, I think it's meant to be about 50 miles an hour, but according to Andy, I seem to do halfway back doing about 60. Probably why it puked coolant and oil all over the engine bay, but that could also be because of the problem with the fan. I'm not sure if it really is running a little bit hot, or well, the radiator cap didn't fit, was totally split, and I think the radiator's no good, but the gauges were reading a little bit high. But when we opened the bonnet and you know, touched the engine, it didn't have that hot engine feel about it, so it could be the gauge that's misreading. So this vehicle is what's been taking up quite a lot of my time and a few of my weekend. Now, I'm not trying to do a full restoration at the moment, it's just that winter's coming, it's going to be cold and damp, and I'm trying to cure this paint situation wherever I can. I think the reality is, I think some rust is going to start to come through, and maybe that's normal with an old car, and maybe if I can get a couple of years out of it, maybe I'll do a bare metal respray on it, just pay somebody to sort it out. But until then, I think I'm just going to patch it up where I can, make sure the chassis is good, and you know, everything that I see going rusty I'm going to treat, and hopefully drive it and enjoy it. So there's going to be probably plenty of truck action coming up, but we'll have to see, won't we? See you later. Bye for now.